Hello, I will talk about the Ukraine-Russia war, also known as special military operation. Uh, the Ukraine-Russia war is a military conflict between Russia and Ukraine, which broke out on February 24th, 2022, when Russian forces attacked Ukraine and penetrated its territory from the north, east, and south. At the same time as the ground attack, the Black Sea Fleet imposed a blockade on Ukrainian ports. The invasion was the culmination of low intensity conflict between the two countries, which began in 2014 following the change of government in Ukraine, when Russia unilaterally annexed the Crimean Peninsula, and pro-Russian separatists in eastern Ukraine took control of territories in the Donbas region with indirect Russian assistance. In the first 3 days of the invasion, the Russians advanced rapidly, mainly on the Belarus-Kiev axis and in the Sumy region in northeastern Ukraine, and in the Kherson region in the south of the country. However, Ukrainian resistance was stronger and more effective than expected, and various logistical problems soon slowed down the path of Russian forces' progress and almost completely halted their progress in several areas. The Ukrainian army received large amounts of advanced combat equipment from NATO allies, and especially from the United States, which helped it fight against the invading forces. The Russians suffered heavy losses in manpower and military equipment, and a significant part of their forces is tied to fight in pockets of resistance that remain in their rear. The Russian Air Force was unable to obtain absolute air superiority, and its activity in the territory of Ukraine was quite limited. However, the Russian offensive in southern Ukraine had significant ground gains. By mid-March, the Russians had taken control of the southern part of Donetsk Oblast, most of the territory of Zaporizhia Oblast, and almost all of Kherson Oblast, creating a land of continuum under their control from the border Russian to the Crimean Peninsula, except for the city of Mariupol, which was placed under siege. As the war continued, it assumed the character of an almost static war of mutual attrition. Beginning in mid-March, the Russian forces in northeastern Ukraine moved to defense, and the Ukrainians began to take the initiative in their own hands. And carried out a series of counterattacks in those areas, as well as in the Mykolaiv district in the south of the country, where the Russians attempt to extend their bridgehead west of the Dnieper River failed. At the beginning of April 2022, the Russian army withdrew within a few days from almost all the territories it occupied in the northeast of Ukraine, in the districts of Kiev, Chernihiv, and Sumy. The Russian command began redeploying the forces which had been evacuated from those districts, with the intention of concentrating the offensive effort in southeastern Ukraine and completing the takeover of the entire Donbas region. However, although in mid-April, Ukrainian and Russian sources announced the opening of the second phase of the campaign, or the battle for Donbas, in practice no large-scale Russian attack was conducted in this area. The Russians continued to carry out a series of limited attacks, mainly in the north of the Donbas, and the rate of their progress remained extremely slow, while the Ukrainians conducted counterattacks mainly in the area of the city of Kharkiv. The main Russian achievement during April was the capture of almost the entire city of Mariupol after heavy fighting. At the same time as the ground campaign, the Russians continued to attack mainly with cruise missiles a large number of targets deep in the territory of Ukraine, with the aim of damaging vital military and civilian infrastructure and shipments of military equipment from the west, and cutting off the fighting scene in southeastern Ukraine from the west of the country. In the second week of May 2022, the Russians managed to break out of the small salient they held in the area of the city of Popasna, created a large bulge in the front in the north of Donbas, and reached a short distance from the important crossroads in Bakhmut. Towards the end of June 2022, the Russian army launched a major attack from several directions on the Severodonetsk, Lysychansk region, and by July 4, the city of Lysychansk, the last Ukrainian outpost in the Luhansk region, fell into the hands of the Russians. The Ukrainian forces who defended the area had to evacuate it quickly after suffering heavy losses, and retreat towards Seversk in order to be saved from Insir Clement. After the withdrawal from the Lysychansk area, the Ukrainians recognized on Seversk Solodar Bakhmut line, and the front line in the Donbass remained significantly unchanged during the next 2 months. At the end of August 2022, the Ukrainians took the initiative and carried out a series of large-scale counterattacks in various areas of the front. The first counterattack in the Kherson region met with fierce resistance and achieved limited progress. However, the second attack, launched at the beginning of September in the sector north of the city of Balaklia in Kharkiv district, achieved a deep penetration of the Russian defense system and was a complete success. The Russian command had to evacuate within a few days almost all the territory under its control in the Kharkov region, including the Isium area, and retreat to the line of the Oskil River. In the second half of September, 2 significant events took place with the potential to change the course of the war in Ukraine. On the 21st of the month, Putin announced the partial mobilization of the reserve forces in Russia, and the Russian Minister of Defense announced that in the first phase about 300,000 reserve soldiers would be recruited to reinforce the Russian forces fighting in Ukraine. At the same time, the Russian announced the holding of referendums in the districts of Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson on the annexation of those districts to the Russian Federation. Following the results of the referendums, which were led in the territories controlled by Russia in aforementioned districts between September 23rd and 27th, the Russian equivalent announced on September 20th and on September 13th the annexation of the 4 districts of Ukraine to Russia, even though Russia didn't control some of them, a move that was widely condemned internationally. Despite the annexation, the Ukrainian army continued to attack and retake territory in the regions annexed by Russia. In the north of the Donbass, the Ukrainians scored the Oskil River line and created a wide bridgehead on its eastern bank, but their progress in this sector was almost completely blocked by the Russian forces. In southern Ukraine, the Ukrainians continued to attack the Russian bridgehead on the west bank, but the bank of the Dnieper in the Kherson region. In early November, the Russian command decided to evacuate the bridgehead on its own initiative, and by November 11th completed the evacuation of its forces from the bridgehead, a move that allowed the Ukrainians to liberate the city of Kherson and retake about 30% of the territory of Kherson district. The war resulted in extensive international sanctions on Russia and its condemnation, and the mobilization of the West to help Ukraine with arms and money. Sweden and Finland announced their intention to join NATO. In the territories of Ukraine, evidence of acts of Russian atrocities against civilians on large scale, which are being investigated as war crimes by Western and international bodies. As a result of the war, huge damage was caused to the infrastructure and economy in Ukraine, estimated at hundreds of billions of dollars, and millions of Ukrainians were forced to leave the territory of the country and became refugees. Ahead of the winter months Russia has increased its attacks against infrastructure facilities throughout Ukraine. As a result, there was severe damage to the supply of electricity, water, and essential services, and there is a fear of another humanitarian disaster in the frozen winter months. Inside Russia, the Putin administration imposed extensive restrictions on citizens and tightened its control over the country. Thank you very much.